Here's
Um, we're glad to be back. Facebook Live. I'll tell you what, back in March, when we kind of started these, I decided I was going to make my garage, because I'm working from home, as my studio for these things. Not remembering that Chico gets a little warm. So it's about 102, and I'm here in my garage with the garage door open. So if I just start profusely sweating, that's Chico lifestyle. So
Terrence will sweat for beer.
Yeah, I will. Absolutely. So you guys are ahead of me. I'll open up my beer, but we would like to introduce a couple dear friends from down in Admiral Malting, down in Alameda, and I'll let both Ron and Curtis each introduce themselves. Ron, you wanna start the festivities?
Sure. Since I'm the senior guy here, I guess why not?
Are you older than me? Are you older than me?
I don't know. 1960.
Oh yeah, you're older than me.
Not
much. Okay.
But I come at this from having been in the brewing business for about 24 years now. First opened a little brewery restaurant in San Francisco called Thirsty Bear Brewing Company. And back in 2007, we took that organic. It's just a little pub in the city, San Francisco. And went organic, and then just along the way started really thinking about what makes beer. What is the heart of beer? And it's barley. It's the main agricultural ingredient. We have incredible agriculture here. It's a drought tolerant crop. Anyhow, I got very interested in the idea of malting. I had actually had a farmer call us up one day and just say, "Hey, I can grow some organic barley for you. Why don't you make beer from it?" I'm saying, well, there's kind of one step between barley and beer, and it's called malting. And it seems simple. All you have to do is soak the barley, germinate it, and dry it, but it's a little more complex than that. So it got me interested in traveling around, and that's how I met Curtis. Meanwhile, he's going to give you his own story, but Curtis had his own route in there too. But we grew that barley, and we had one of the first craft malt companies in the country really malt it. We shipped it all the way to Colorado Maltings. There were some farmers there that started one of the first small batch maltsters, malting companies. And then they shipped it back, and so the carbon footprint was just hellacious. But it proved the concept, and it was really nice quality barley that was grown. We call it locavore ale, and that planted the seed for me, which eventually led to just meeting the folks at UC, going to Dr. Lewis, my old mentor, and talking with him about that and understanding the history of growing malting barley in California, which actually goes back to the 1800s, and even exporting it to England, where the malt exchanges on London just loved the California barley. They called it sun-kissed because it wouldn't get mold or fusarium, basically, Don. And it was really interesting. And then Dr. Lewis introduced me to a barley breeder there named Lynn Gallagher. And that's actually how I met Curtis. This is originally at a barley field day at UC Davis. And then later on at a craft maltsters conference. We were at the beginning of the first conference of the Craft Maltsters Guild, and this was at a CBC, a Craft Brewers Conference too. And so that's, really, I don't want to spend an hour talking about how we got founded here. But that's really how I met Curtis and got really interested in barley and growing it, and the whole connecting the farmer to the maltster to the brewer and the land, and because at the end of the day, we're all here, whether it's Sierra or whoever. It's an agricultural product they're highlighting. It's they're grand, like you guys did this year with your estate barley. I mean, what's more connected to the land than that? So that's where we're at.
And I love how you got planted the seed into your whole story. That was very sharp. Curtis. Curtis, tell us a little about yourself. That was awesome.
I'm Curtis Davenport. I'll give a little shorter introduction than Ron. So I'm head maltster here at Admiral Maltings, and Ron and I and our third business partner, Dave McLean, opened Admiral Maltings in actually almost exactly 3 years ago in 2017. And prior to making malt here, I was one of those farmers that Ron referenced, who didn't understand that there was, a step between growing barley and making beer. And so I was growing organic fruits and vegetables primarily in Santa Barbara County, and had some land that had access to some land that didn't have irrigation. And so myself and the folks I was farming with, we were thinking about kind of what are some dry farmed crops that we could grow, and there aren't that many options in California. So grains are a great option for growing without irrigation, but they're really just not worth that much if you're not adding value to them. And so I wanted to work, directly with brewers or bakers, and kind of started, learned pretty quickly that raw barley is not the main ingredient in beer. And so started learning a lot about malting, and eventually built a small malting system to malt about 500 pounds at a time. And through doing that and being connected with the Craft Maltsters Guild and UC Davis, met Ron, and we built Admiral together, and now we've been making malt for 3 years.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting, because you brought up something in there that maybe some of our listeners are not familiar with. But the barley you guys deal with is a winter crop. So when is it actually planted, and when is it harvested, and what kind of steps? How is it stored, and when do you decide to malt it?
Sure. Can we give a cheers first? I feel like we've all been
cheers.
waiting for that.
Cheers. Oh, by the way, I think I'm supposed to do all that other stuff, like, hey, we're Facebook Live, Sierra Nevada, welcome aboard. I haven't done this
Before we
in a few
jump
weeks.
into
I'm a little rusty here. All right.
So guys, we were kind of talking about this. I grew up in the Dakotas, where a lot of barley is planted, and I always found it kind of odd that you guys start a little bit in the fall, and I was like, wow, that's different from what we do. So yeah, can you talk a little bit about the growing season and just the farms you're working with, and the no-till farming, which I found absolutely mind-blowing?
Yeah. So the barley, it gets even more confusing here, because we grow spring barley, which in most places would be planted in the spring and harvested in the fall. In California, we have mild enough climate where those same varieties or similar varieties can be planted in the fall, and then take advantage of all of our fall and winter rains. That's why they often don't need any irrigation, or they're grown on ground that doesn't have irrigation. So they'll be planted in the fall, and then they'll grow kind of slowly in the nice, mild, rainy winter weather. And then when the weather starts to heat up in the spring, that's when they mature and eventually dry out. That barley or any grain needs to be dry to be harvested. And so that usually happens around May in California, end of May, beginning of June. All of our barley this year was harvested, I think, first week of June. And at that point, it's, a nice dry, shelf stable, just a dry grain. And so it can be stored, if it's stored in good conditions, it could be stored for years. So we'll have one harvest from the Sacramento Valley in late spring, early summer, and then that's what we'll use for the entire next year of malting.
Cool.
Yeah,
that's awesome. And so a little bit about your facility, and I think we talked about this prior to us kind of going live. You're in essence a small maltster, right? You're by no means like producing massive amounts. You're dealing with a lot of kind of old world grains, things of that nature. And I actually look at what you guys are doing, and now you're starting to see them pop up a little bit. River Bend out near our other facility in North Carolina. You guys are good buddies with them. You're starting to see this kind of resurgence of kind of what Ron said. Like what I find is the grain is actually the soul of the beer, right? It's literally what makes the body of the beer. And your industry is seeing a lot of what the hop industry saw maybe 10, 15 years ago, of where the hop growers really started to kind of focus on, and hop suppliers started focusing on the small craft brewer, because they were, using much more hops. They were kind of focusing on hops with IPAs and things of that nature. And now you guys are literally kind of doing the same thing with supplying different flavors and things like that. So, Ron, if you lead us off a little bit of like how you're, like what you guys focus on, because I don't think a lot of people know what, floor malting is compared to large germination vessels and things of that nature.
There we go. There's even footprints in there. Nice. Yeah.
Pretty cool. That's our malt floor. Yeah, I mean, we can't compete with the big with large maltsters. It's sort of a relic from the big brewing days. That's one thing that never really shifted along with craft malt. I think hops, number one, you guys, I mean, let's face it, Sierra with the Pale Ale, Anchor with the Liberty, introduced America or craft brewers to hops. And part of that connection is, too, it's a very simple thing. Oh, hops smell. Hops bitterness. It's a very straightforward thing. It's an agricultural product. You can see little pictures of it. It was easy to connect, and it was easy to distinguish. But that same kind of distinguishing characteristics hadn't gone on with the large maltster. So we focus number one on how we grow it. Curtis talked about his first attraction to it is it could be dry farmed. And so we try and sustainably grow it. And it's either going to be certified organic, like you guys did with your state barley, which is certified organic, or we use no-till farming, which is just really another arrow in the quiver to help fight global warming, because it sequesters carbon, it makes a healthier soil, therefore less need for inputs, fertilizers, and this and that. The microbiome of bacteria and fungi is healthier in there. It keeps more moisture in the soil, and it doesn't erode as easily with wind and rain. So the farming method, and no-till is just where you're not plowing and tilling the soil. You're letting last year's stubble and crop become just, you're just drilling in and putting the seeds in. It's not really drilling. It's almost micro tilling, I guess, would be a better way to call it. But it's not plowing and tilling the soil like that. So we focus on the sustainable growing of it. We focus on the variety. We have this great resource of UC Davis right there, and so we have a variety that's used nowhere else in the world, nowhere else in the country, other than what you guys have grown and what we've grown of it. We're the guys, of doing that, and it's actually a really nice malting barley. And then we do focus on process, and so it's the floor malting, and that's just where the malt, after being steeped and germinated, it's placed in a really thin layer on the floor, and we turn it by hand. So we introduce oxygen for respiration by hand on the floor. But again, just the way it grows and the characteristics of the growth through, and the microbiome and the concentration of CO2 in it in that environment is very different than in the larger industrial salad in box type methods. And then lastly, we can kiln it and get it to you literally a day after we've kilned it. And I think it's just obvious if we smell anything. Aaron McLeod, in the last podcast he did on specialty malt, he gave this example, so I'm going to rip it up. But anything you smell, why? Because volatiles are coming off, right? It's a smell. The longer it sits there, the more volatiles are coming off. So if you can get that product in a fresh with the most volatiles that are still in that product and all, you're going to get a more aromas and freshness and flavor. And we believe it's the same with malt, that a fresh malt, anecdotally and just experimentally, like tasting, it does travel through to the beer. It does taste different. So we try and add value in a number of stages to what a brewer or a distiller can get from our malt.
Yeah,
so
I know.
Go ahead.
Okay. No. I gotta say this. No, I gotta say this. So, Ken, Ken, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the estate, but I'm afraid I'm going to forget this because I think this is really cool because we're having this meeting on how we're going to change estate over the coming years, right? We're going to go away from doing our IPA, and I'll tell you a little more later. But one of the things he had said is like, oh, you got to talk to Jim, one of our the guy that's kind of managing our barley fields. And he's got some new, or actually old varieties of malt that we're trying to grow up so that eventually our crops, and they're all these heirloom varietals that were grown, 100 years ago up in this area of barley, and so whenever I was talking to Jim about it, he's like, yeah, literally, we got like UC Davis, we got like not even a handful of seeds. Like we're starting with like 10 seeds, and then we're growing, and then we're harvesting that grain and then growing that the next year. And then like literally, so eventually we're going to have enough grain where we can grow a whole field of this heritage type of barley that was originally grown up in, Butte County area, which is, I think, really cool that, UC Davis and other, universities and stuff kind of keep that alive, right? I mean, it's pretty neat. And I know you guys work with some growers that probably do that same thing. I remember being at the San Francisco Farmers Market, and there's a guy that sells breads and grains that's out of like Woodland area or something, and he's got a lot of really old world rye grain and things like that he's using in his breads. So
yeah, and that was one of the things that when I visited you guys, I'm a beer geek. I think it was 2 years ago I visited you. So I'd been in the industry for like 11 years, and of course, you guys were on the end of my trip from starting at St. George, going to Faction, a little bit of Rockfall, and visiting you, and Justin
Slurry Byron.
Yeah, I got there, and it's always been about hops. It's always been about yeast. It's been about water, and I had this moment of clarity, when you guys were taking me around. And one of the things, we walked by this bag, and when I thought about malt at that point, it was like always the roast. Like, how is it roasted? It's brown malt, crystal malt, and I walk by and I see this word on one of the bags, and I thought it was some roast of barley that I'd never heard of. And I asked you guys, and you're like, oh, that's the varietal. I'm like, wait, what? Malt comes in different varieties? Like up at that point, I just thought about like yellow corn and roasting it to different degrees, and never thought about it like, oh, this is a varietal, like, that of something that someone grew. Yeah. It was just this mind-blowing thing that I thought I'd learned everything about beer, and then you all took me down a different rabbit hole, and I got the malt book that the Brewers Association, and spent like 3 months just reading about malt. So yeah, I got to thank you guys for that. And anyone that's like, if you visit that facility, it's mind-blowing. Like, but yeah, I mean, yeah, different varietals are just insane when it comes to malt.
Yeah, imagine if there was just white and red wine, and there was Pinot Noir. It's
there's rosé. Come on, there's rosé.
So yeah, the idea of the Atlas.
Yeah, so I mean this goes to what both Byron and Terrence were mentioning, that there's more than one barley. There's not just malting barley. There's lots of different types of varieties of malting barley, and they're all unique. And there's some really old ones, like the ones that sounds like you're growing out in the estate program. Then there's some new ones that are perform really well for the modern farmer that needs to have the best disease resistance and yield to fit into their commercial farming operation. So there's kind of the balance of the old and the new. And something that's pretty cool for us to work on is to be able to bring some of those old varieties to market and kind of discover what's been lost in the decades of barley breeding, to kind of really focus on a really narrow set of quality parameters for barley. We have all of this variation in older varieties that's kind of been lost as a result of that. And so, yeah, we were able to malt some Atlas, which is one of the first barley varieties grown in California. And we worked with a farmer whose family had been growing that barley for generations and saving the seed. And so it's really, truly fits a definition of an heirloom. It was, a variety that's just been adapted to their farm. And we were able to make some malt from that earlier this year. And a brewery here in the Bay Area made a lager out of it. And it's delightful to kind of pick up on these, real floral, fruity notes that typically we wouldn't associate with barley, but they're shining through in these old varieties. Possibly lots in the mix.
Tell us who that brewery is and what's the name of the beer.
Oh, that's the pre-pro lager from East Brother Beer.
Oh, cool.
Wasn't sure if I was allowed to.
No, no, man. We're all family, baby.
But what's curious too is this is a variety that was brought by the Spanish. It was from the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, so it's called Atlas. And actually, UC Davis, it was they were working through 200 samples of that to do their first barley varieties around 1900. So between 1900 and 1950, UC Davis released more than a few malting barley varieties that came from this land race is what they call it, because it's just been here so long. So yeah, super exciting. And that farmer was just, had been in his family. And so it's a very interesting 6-row. I mean, like the beta glucan was off the charts, and yet it made the most crystal clear, beautiful beer with corn that you could imagine. So
that's awesome.
So you beer geeks out there that think you know everything about beer, you better start reading about malt, because those stories are.
So that was going to be kind of. I have a question, but I want you to kind of walk people through, because we have a variety of listeners here. So Curtis, can you walk us through a little bit of the malting process, relatively briefly, but how do those different varieties actually? I didn't mean that as a jab.
We could talk for a long time. So
I know. But how do those different varieties, like, how do they obviously probably perform a little bit different. It's the same as like if we're brewing with all 2-row malt that's modified perfect, our runoffs are brilliant, but you start throwing in some oats and you start throwing some other stuff in there, it's going to gum everything up. It doesn't perform quite the way that it does. So maybe a little explanation of how these different varieties what's different in the process.
Sure. First, just a primer on the malting process. So beer is made from barley that's been fermented into alcohol. What's fermented are sugars that originally come from barley, but in the barley they're not fermentable. They're these really complex starches, and they're protected by lots of other proteins and cellulose, and so they're really they're not fermentable. And so what the malting process does is it breaks down the barley kernel so that the brewer can access all of the starches in it and convert those into sugars that the yeast can then ferment. And so we do that by steeping it in large tanks. And then for us, we spread it on a malt floor, and it germinates for 4 to 6 days. And that germination process is really what transforms the inside of the barley kernel and turns it into malt. And then after germination is complete, we'll stop the germination by putting it into a kiln and kind of lightly roasting it to dry it out and also to add a lot of color and flavor.
In essence, killing it, right?
Yeah, killing it, preserving it. Yeah, killing it and setting onto it, giving it a new life as beer eventually. But so the different barley varieties are because we are growing them in the malt house. Every living thing wants to grow kind of its own way, and so every variety is going to grow a little bit differently in the malt house. Some will need to steep a bit differently. Some will need to germinate shorter or longer. And as a result of that, the kind of the composition of what's inside of that barley kernel when it goes into the kiln, that's what's going to give you, different flavors when you cook it. So yeah, really the varieties kind of have their own inherent differences, and then we have to process them differently based on what they need to turn into functional malt, and that creates the whole new creates whole new flavors.
So Curtis, you are brilliant. You read that little note from Kevin over there that says let's move on to porter, because you just brought up the fact that you can treat that grain a little differently to get different flavors and get different aromas and things of that nature. One thing I want you to go as we open up our porter and start pouring it and getting ready to talk a little bit about different types of roasting process and things of that nature. Ron, can you go over a little bit of the Admiral Malting, where it's located, how people can get there, what you guys are doing right now to still kind of survive and live, and in the Rake, and what the Rake's all about. I love the concept of the Rake, where you're pouring other breweries' beers that use your malts. So give us a little background of that while I grab my beer.
Absolutely. No, so we're in Alameda, and it's kind of fun because we're right around St. George Spirits, Faction Brewing Company. We share a building with Almanac, and on the other side of the island, there's Alameda Island Brewing Company. There's a couple of wineries. There's building for. So we're in a great area. But then aside from it, it's on the old naval base in Alameda, and so there's spectacular views of San Francisco. But what we decided to do that's really different there, beside the fact that it's a floor malting facility in an area that we can bring in the trucks and not have any problems and all that sort of stuff, is we decided to put a pub that overlooks the malt house floor, and that's where Curtis is sitting, and he's looking over the malt house floor as he showed.
Show us again, Curtis.
If he does it again. So, and what's cool about that is, to our knowledge, it's the only pub in the world that looks over a malt house floor, where people are floor malting. And so what we want to, it's really an education. I mean, it's fun. It's a mecca for beer lovers and spirit lovers. I'll get into that in a second. But originally, it's just beer that we offered there. We have about 20 different beers on tap. We've had several, from Sierra. It's the only requirement is that they use at least some Admiral malt. And so it's really fun. A lot of people are doing some of their most special and celebratory beers with our malt. And so, and from basically all over California. Occasionally we'll get someone, Breakside up in Portland. I mean, but most 99.999% is really California. But now we're going to start to serve spirits too. So people have actually distilled, and we did the whole, broke it off in separate license. And so we will be having, we have 8 whiskeys right now that within a matter of a week, I would say, will be available. I mean, they're there on premise.
Ron, stop. Because
road trip.
Byron's going to go down there and he's not coming back.
No, I'll be down there in 5. And it's funny, the area that you guys are in is, I make an annual trip down there. And, I used to go there. When I started going to Alameda was probably 13 years ago, to go on a trip to St. George. And when my GPS was taking me there, it looked like I was going through some zombie apocalypse war zone. And then suddenly there's a St. George, because there's all these old, for anyone that's never been there, it's actually, like you said, an old naval base where they used to keep the planes. So there's these giant, huge airplane hangars, and they were all abandoned except for St. George. And then over the years, Faction moved in next door, and Rockwell, and now you guys and Almanac are sharing that building. And it's like, it's just this awesome place to go visit.
Yeah, I will say, if there's anybody that's out there that's never been, so Alameda is like this, and actually, hopefully the people of Alameda aren't listening, because they'll be pissed off, right? They have this. It is an island, and it's
a wonderful place.
It's its own world. It really is. It's like, I used to go when I was a kid and I was skateboarding in like Walnut Creek. I met this professional skateboarder, and he lived in Alameda, and I'd go take Bart out to Oakland, and I'd ride my skateboard through the tunnel to get to Alameda, and I never
was brave.
It's like old world. I mean, it is like quiet. It's and it's really so the times I've come out there is like get a little hotel in Alameda, and you're on an island, and you got everything you need right down where you guys are at. You get brewery tours, you got you can ride a bicycle from place to place, and it's a spectacular little scene you guys got going on down
After
there.
I start my day, I tend to not get on the bike. I just walk from place.
Well, yeah, I mean,
it's a small town in a huge metropolis. I mean, that's sort of like what it is, small town feel. But no, it's great. We're in an old building built in 1944 by the Navy. It was a dry goods warehouse, and it's 50,000 square feet. But yeah, look at those. I mean, it's just cathedral-like rafters from redwood. It's beautiful, and we kept it all. It's all open. It's all very much original, and it's pretty beautiful. And at the Rake, we serve food. So you can get really excellent. We're the same. Focus on agricultural products or whatever for your beer. We're focusing on in the pub, so people can eat well and stuff like that while they're having a beer, or very, very shortly, within days, whiskeys, bourbons, this sort of thing, and all sorts of stuff with, wheat malt and barley malts and even some oat malts. And it's going to be fun.
That's cool.
You're making me thirsty, man. Like, we were talking a little earlier. It sounds like you're turning your parking lots
we are
into it. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like what your plans are for the next couple of weeks? And
so obviously the whole shelter in place and the conditions and all that. But what has happened is that what is clear is that it's safer to be outside 6 feet apart if you're going to do something. So it's been determined that the risk is acceptable or minimal or whatever the proper word is. But so we're going to have picnic tables. So the front of our establishment is just a gigantic parking lot, really. I mean, it probably used to be a runway, and it we're going to have picnic tables there. Almanac will have picnic tables there, and they'll all be at least 6 feet apart, and ours will seat about up to 6 people. And you have to order a meal with any or on the same transaction as your spirits or your beer or whatever you're supposed to. That's the law in the state and everything. So, but we can do that, and so we'll serve beer and spirits and all that. And same thing over at Almanac, and I imagine eventually over Faction if you're going to take a tour that day. But so we're really pleased to be able to reopen, because it's been. You can open outside, you can just be in your patio, you can extend it, and you can't. And it's difficult. I mean, this is without solid national leadership, it's very difficult to have good planning anywhere. And so every county, every state is just doing the best it can.
Right. Yep.
That's what's going on.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Like you're making the best of it. Like, I can't wait to come down next week when it's 110 degrees here and enjoy the 60-degry Bay Area.
Byron's inviting himself, by
the way. And U-turns, So,
I know.
Road trip.
I probably got some bass fishing tournament or something I'm doing. So, all right. So we're digging into this porter, which does not have any Admiral malt as of yet. Maybe we change that. But Curtis, maybe walk us through. This has got like chocolate malt. It's got caramel malt. How are malts treated post germination to kind of bring the flavors that you're getting in this type of beer?
Sure. Yeah. So I've actually got a little pale ale left. So I'll show you. Obviously we all know these are different colors, and that difference in color in the beer. Comes solely from how it was kilned or roasted. So the last step of the malting process is either kilning, where it's kind of in a big bed and you're blowing hot air through it, or it could be, and that would produce a malt. That's all we do here at Admiral is kiln our malt. So that could produce something as light as a malt that would make like a Pilsner style beer. That would be, sounds like Terrence has some work going on over there.
No, I think it's the last garbage truck coming through.
Oh, nice. So a Pilsner style malt would be the hottest it would ever get in the kiln would be like 185, 190 degrees, and that gives like a nice straw color. If we wanted to make a malt that would make a beer of this color, we would turn the temperature up a little bit in the kiln to a little over 200 degrees. To make a beer, more like a porter, anything that's dark brown or black, that really requires a drum roaster. And that's where you have either malt or raw barley that would be put into a drum. If you know what a coffee roaster is like, it's the same thing. It rotates around, and it's much hotter. It'd be 350, 400, 500 degrees inside of there. And that's how you get the really dark color. But when you get that dark color, you get a whole different range of flavors. And really, you'd only, I guess we could maybe let the brewers get more into the details about that. But it's a really small percentage of the beer. It might be 1 to 10% of the beer made up of those darker malts. And so really the whole kind of alcohol, all the alcohol and the, most of the majority of the beer is still made using really lightly colored malts. That's something I think a lot of people
do. You guys have a drum roaster, or are there plans to get a drum roaster and do some of that, or just do it the old school way of almost starting a fire in the malt house and put everybody out? Like that's the great stories of the old days. When homebrewers used to like roast their own barley. Ken's got some great stories about making his wife angry by trying to make roast barley in his oven. So any plans to smoke out Alameda?
So we don't have a roaster. We would love to have a roaster. Maybe that's in the works at some point. But we do have kind of a hybrid style kiln that's capable of a lot more than what a traditional malt kiln would be capable of doing. So we can make actually some really dark, pretty dark malts, and there's kind of different physics in the kiln to achieve that same color without burning down the malt house. But we can make a pretty dark, for anyone listening who's familiar with different color scales of malt, we can make a malt that approaches 100 Lovibond, whereas some of the real darker roasted malts would be 300, 400, 500.
And this would be using chocolate malt, which would be, I believe, it's around 300 to 400. Black patent malt's around 500 to get some ideas out there.
And we do that really by Curtis will basically stew the starches inside the kernels. So it's not it's not the heat, they're all sugar. And then he blasts it, he just cranks up the kiln to 300 degrees, and we can caramelize, just turn into caramel, the sugars in there. And that's where, so it's like you bite into this and it's all dark inside, but the outside, it's a little darker, but it's nothing like the caramelized sugars on the inside. I think it's a really delicious, complex style of kiln. We call it kilned caramel. I mean, it is a kilned caramel. It's not a crystal malt. It's a kilned caramel. I think it's a delicious style of that darker malt.
I think you guys are one of the few that are actually making, instead of a crystal malt, a caramel malt. I think those terms get crossed a lot, and a lot of people mistake crystal for caramel and not realizing what actual caramel malt is, where crystal malt is, each little grain is a little mini mash tun. Like caramel malt is done more the way you guys are doing it, which is an interesting take and a flavor on that.
Yeah, it's different pathways to get to a similar color level, or we have a kind of an upper limit that a crystal malt can get way beyond in a roaster. But anytime there's malt and beer, again, we don't just talk about a dark beer. There's a whole range of flavors you could have in a dark beer, and there's the same thing, a whole range of flavors in a dark malt. And so the way you make those flavors obviously is going to have an impact on what the end result is.
Cool. Well, I'll drink to that. Cheers.
Cheers. And I think, speaking of those kilned caramels, I guess we'll get into this later, but a couple of years ago, we made a kilned caramel malt for the Sierra Nevada estate, out of the Sierra Nevada state barley. So I don't know if that's necessarily a segue, but
segue.
If I've heard an introduction ever, that's a great one. So we should Terrence, should we pop it open?
I think we should pop it open, and I'm going to go probably back to mute because we got our yard waste coming through. I got a fly that is bugging the hell out of me, and we got planes flying over. So it's getting nuts over here.
That's a typical party at the Sullivan household.
Yeah. Great.
Here he comes. He's coming down. He's hitting the baskets.
Sweet. Oh, yeah.
Hey, and by the way, if anyone has questions out there, kind of throw them out. We're going to start answering questions here in just a little bit.
We love questions.
So just a little back history about the estate, just so those of you that haven't come across this before. The philosophy with the estate was, pretty akin to like the land beer style of, Ken wanted to make a beer with our own malts and our own hops. When we started doing the estate ale, which, growing hops has been fun, and Terrence will talk a little bit about this here in Chico. Not quite the climate to grow hops. Great climate to grow barley, though. And so, yeah, it started out with the philosophy of making a beer with our own hops and our own barley, building it up from that. And then we've done it a few years. 1 year, we actually lost the barley, and we had a beer called Devastation. And and then that was Estate's Evil Twin, a black IPA that we made. Terrence revived that from that, and now we're bringing it in a little bit. Terrence, you want to talk about the estate project, the future?
Yeah, but first I'm going to say that wasn't the yard waste. I realized that was the recycle truck, and I got to admit, I've had neighbors that have said, you have a lot of glass breaking and cans of clanking when your yard waste gets picked up. So
don't judge me.
I can't get enough of this aroma.
Yeah.
It's got such a beautiful raisin caramel. It's incredible aroma there.
Yeah. So I can't remember what you asked, Byron. I'm already losing it. Anyways, but so the estate that 1 year we had a terrible crop year, and didn't get I think actually, Byron, it was we got a really nasty storm at the very end.
That's what it was, is we had the drought, and right about the time we were getting ready, and we're like, okay, we can save some of this barley, and it was like, maybe we'll save enough to make a batch. We had this windstorm that came along and blew everything down, rained on it all, and we just lost the whole thing.
Couldn't harvest it.
And
what's really kind of cool too is that when we grow our own barley, we actually use Chico State has a huge ag department, and so it's actually kind of training for the kids in class and stuff, and we use their equipment, and they come out and kind of help us harvest all that stuff. So it's really kind of cool. But what I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit, this beer here that we're tasting is kind of a transition that came out a couple of years ago. And we're kind of looking, what are we going to do about the estate beer? A lot of it is focused on the hops, and Chico is very difficult to actually grow hops unless you pump a ton of water on it. So we're kind of always looking at ways of changing the beer a little bit. And so we came up with an idea for this year, which is actually just kind of a little tease of what we're going to do in the future. And kind of the idea of what we thought of doing. And I think you, Curtis and Ron, you guys are going to love this idea of like trying to focus more on the malt and the body of the beer, and not necessarily, try to produce an IPA with hops that are grown in a not so suitable environment is very difficult. So we really want to focus on the grains. So growing the estate barley here, having you guys play with it, and creating something like an imperial brown ale, and really featuring the malt quality of the beer. And then for 2021, our dream is to actually brew with this same grain age it in organic wine barrels, add some local peaches from what we think is like really good from our farm on site at Sierra Nevada, and aging that, add the fruit really kind of late in the aging process, but about 6 months on that red wine, organic red wine barrels, throw in some fruit for the last couple months, and bottle that stuff up and get it out to people. I'm
ready.
Sounds pretty fun, huh? Doesn't it?
Ready. That's delicious. That sounds just wonderful.
And this is really great. I think this beer, like you said, Ron, it's got that. I got this kind of almost like, real stone fruity type of characteristics. Yeah. Some of the wort from this was actually taken out and put in some like pseudo cool ships out in the in the peach farms at Chico State.
Okay.
So it has some little bit of natural fermentation going on in there. So
this was the first year we used your malt in this and did this. In the old days when we did the malt, we used to have to ship it out to, I believe, Wisconsin. And speaking of carbon footprint again, that wasn't ideal. We grow this barley here, and then we're shipping it out to bring it back. And then we found, I think, someone in Oregon. And then when you guys started, this was one of the first batches. Of malt that came through your malt house, and it's great to have that connection and keep it local, and just keep it within a small radius instead of using all this footprint. And we just shipped, I believe, it was 60,000 pounds of barley out to you guys. Have you malted it yet? We
haven't malted it yet, but we're gearing up to do that, and it looks like an excellent crop this year.
Cool.
So we're excited.
Excellent quality. We're really excited.
Well, would you expect anything different? Oh, sorry.
If it wouldn't have made it,
that's a loaded question. As we call it. So I think we might be. I actually sent something to Kevin. Hopefully, we have some questions out there, and we kind of nail down some of this.
Time flies by.
I know, doesn't it?
Where did you go to learn to be a maltster? Ron went to law school.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You didn't bring that up.
Both Curtis and I went to the CMBTC, the Canadian Malting Barley Technical Center, which in North America was really pretty much the only place that had a course on malting that was of a practical nature. It's always covered. I studied with Dr. Lewis when he opened the American Brewers Guild, and I think he spent the first week talking about malt. But there's nothing like the practicality. I'm going to let Curtis talk more because he actually malted before he opened Admiral.
There aren't that many options. The CMBTC that Ron mentioned, just doing it yourself is a great way to learn, even in your kitchen. Anyone can make malt. If you find some barley, you can grow it and then put it in your oven to kiln it. And then the Craft Maltsters Guild, which is just a quick plug. It's a group of a lot of small maltsters and actually big maltsters alike who are kind of pulled together to create more educational resources and teach people about malt.
Curtis, isn't like the Canadian Malt Board, or in their courses also in like South Dakota or
Fargo at University of North Dakota in Fargo is actually one of the few colleges that offers a barley program. So go home state.
But that Craft Maltster Guild and Aaron McLeod, who used to be, he was in charge of the lab that did all the testing for the Canadian Grain Commission. So this guy has touched more malt, more barley, more grains just in general, and tested them. And he's the one who's pretty much in charge of what's taught through, to my knowledge, right, Curtis, through the through the Craft Maltsters Guild.
Yeah, they kind of partner together, and so Craft Maltsters Guild. Look it up if you want to learn how to make malt.
There you go.
Nice. Tips for malting at home, specifically hardy gluten-free grains like sorghum and millet.
Yeah, try it and let us know. We haven't malted sorghum or millet.
This is where they bring a fire extinguisher and a smoke alarm.
Well, there's actually there's a guy up here in Chico and Byron that's doing stuff with rice. A lot of stuff.
Yeah, he's malting rice. His wife has celiacs, and so he started making rice beers because rice is huge up here around this area. The only thing that we're growing besides almonds is a lot of rice. So he's been working on that. It's a pretty cool little project.
Yeah, and to actually I was going to actually answer the question. Really find the right conditions where the seed is growing. So if the seed is growing, you're in good shape. So if you're gonna, you'll need to give it some water. If you give it too much water, it's going to die and it's not going to grow. So try to kind of gently coax it into germinating, and then germinate it for a few days. It's kind of something like millet or sorghum. It's probably going to be kind of hard to tell when the germination's done, but give it a few days and then really slowly dry it out in an oven. Maybe even just use your oven light if you want to get like a pale color, or turn your oven up to 250, 300 degrees to get like a darker toasted flavor.
When we talk about sprouting, you're not growing a plant here. You don't want to see that leaf come out. So it's prior to the leaf coming out of the seed. So that's called the acrospire, at least in a barley. And in barley, for example, you want that first leaf to be the full length of the seed. So if you're going to try it at home, I haven't used sorghum, I haven't done millet, but grouse malting in Colorado, that's all they do is gluten-free. And I'm guessing that it's similar, that you don't want to be growing a plant.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of Ron. I kind of look at it as like home brewing, right?
Yeah.
You just keep plugging at it until you. And make sure you write notes. Don't do like my brother and like not write notes and make an amazing beer and forget about what it took to actually make that beer.
I think that's because
like Ken and write those notes down.
I think that's because you're drinking beer while you're home brewing.
Yeah,
at the moment you're like, oh yeah, I'll remember this, and then you don't.
Yeah, no, you don't.
Lots of notes. Like we have the phones now to keep it.
Yeah. So if you ever tried from Daniel, I'd know that name.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried steeping barley in finished beer to start the germination process? That's a very interesting question there.
Yeah, that's a lot of beer. No, I haven't tried it.
Would the alcohol and pH affect that at all, or
probably it'd probably be kind of a goofy sideways germination, but I don't know. I like the idea. I've never thought about filling one of our tanks. Maybe if someone has 8,000 gallons of beer to spare, we'll try it out.
Give us a call tomorrow.
Yeah.
All right.
we might have some keg beer. We can.
Yeah. Oh.
Right. The whole world.
Scary. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, my ear's itching. What part of California is barley malt grown? Well, okay. Now I'm gonna tell a little story here, and you guys are gonna chime in after this. But if those of you that have never watched the Good Beer, what was Michael Jackson's Good Beer Hunter?
Yeah,
Good Beer Hunter. Yeah, Good Beer Hunter, and he does that little pilgrimage with Fritz Maytag and some people from Anchor, and they go up to Alturas, and there used to be some barley growers up in Alturas, which is up in, I think, Modoc County. By the way, I think still has 0 cases of COVID. Just saying, there's probably only 700 people that live up there. But anyway, it's the northeasternmost county in California, Alturas. They used to grow grain up there for Fritz for making a couple of his beers in the early 70s. And I always told Ken, like, man, we should buy some property up in Alturas and we should go grow grain up there and do kind of our own thing. And this is prior to you guys kind of getting involved. have an Admiral malt, and I think we should still do that. But when I told that to Ken, he said, "Great, can I get you a little cabin up there, and you go live up there, and I don't have to hear what you have to say anymore." But you guys tell us where grains are grown now. I know historically they've because that's kind of high desert up in that area, kind of like that eastern side of Oregon, same sort of thing, which is gets wet winters and kind of dry. So go ahead.
Yeah, you can grow barley all over the state. I've malted barley that I was growing from Santa Barbara County. Most of the barley we use now is from the Sacramento Valley, and especially kind of the western edge of the Sacramento Valley and Hungry Hollow and the Dunnigan Hills. So that's where a lot of our barley comes from. And then the Klamath Basin, which is far north California, just west of the Modoc Plateau. So that's a totally different growing region, different varieties, different growing season. That's actually the traditional plant in the spring, harvest in the fall. And then the Atlas barley that we've made malt from came from Paso Robles. So again, coastal dryland farming.
Wow. Cool. Yeah. Wow, that's
sort of coastal.
That's awesome. Yeah. I'm having such a great time on this this Facebook Live because I'm learning some great shit. So normally we're all together in a pub and you guys are telling me this stuff, and instead we're separated and we're still drinking. But
once again, this is recorded, so we remember it the next day.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So we can go back and listen and be like, "That was a great idea," and say, "What was that I thought about last night?" So
okay,
yep.
So Derek has a pretty cool question here. What's your favorite malt forward Sierra Nevada beer, and what makes it your favorite? I'm going to go at least by the screen. I'm going to start in the upper left-hand corner. Byron, go.
Stout all the way. Like, still one of my favorites. I like I've said before in a few interviews, Stout's got that, with the black malts, the roasted barley, a half a cup can be the tipping point from going to a nice smoky flavor to the end to too roasty. But yeah, I'm going to go with the original beer. Like, yeah, I think Stout's perfect. So, although I do miss our brown ale.
There's no wrong answer, Byron.
Well, I'm going to throw out there that a malt forward beer actually can be a classic Pilsner, Helles, style beer where the malt is very subtle but very noticeable, and you don't have a lot of room for error or whatever. And I think, it's a complete, most people associate some of the darker beers with, that's a malt forward, but you can actually have a Pilsner lager style house that shows the malt as well as anything, or a Kolsch,
Yeah. Curtis,
good.
Curtis, what are you? I don't even know if you drink a lot of our beers, but just make something up.
I did do a Google search, Sierra Nevada beer. No. Thanks for the.
You guys make beer?
You could actually go on our website and it'll actually search by malty, hoppy, whatever. So just search malty.
This goes along with Ron's comment. My favorite, the Kellerweiss, not typically considered a malt forward beer, but I don't even know if you make that anymore.
We do.
I love that beer, and that's even it's not even a barley malt forward beer, but I just love the wheat malt flavor in that beer.
I will say Kellerweiss wort when it's running up before we ferment it out, which I guess is one of those great times to taste what the malt has done. Like Kellerweiss wort is my favorite wort to try. Like it's so delicious if you ever get a chance to try that. That's the malt extracted and the wheat extracted to its soul. So yeah,
love that beer.
What about
Sharon?
you, Ron? Well, I guess you kind of said.
But I sort of said. I love your pale ale, and I think the malt does come forward in that. You know, I mean, yes, it has the Cascade hops and all this kind of stuff, but you know, part of the thing with malt is that it doesn't have to stand alone. Some of the malt characteristics can actually complement and augment hops or even the yeast characteristics. So it's really, you know, that's a. I think there are beers that hide the malt.
Right.
There's no doubt about that. But in general, everything has a malt backbone. So you can't really ignore it.
Right.
You just might focus on other elements.
Yep. Okay, so I'm last. All right, I'm gonna go. I'm. So as you guys were talking, and Ron hit right on it. I'm gonna say, and I'm gonna go the actual company line right here. I'm going there. I'm gonna say Oktoberfest.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry, that's mine also. Yeah.
We're all changing our answer. It's Oktoberfest.
And by the way, it starts shipping August 3rd. All right, I'll get that little plug in there. Cheesy.
I agree.
But I love because we use, you know, several different malts in that. I think last year we used your Munich in that, didn't we? We used we use your Munich malt in that. We use Steffi malt out of Germany. So it has these like biscuity kind of toasty notes to it that are like this. That just like it. I don't know. That style of beer sometimes to me, you know, you get that little bit of spiciness from the hops, but it's all about like that blend of malts. And that blend of hops is just so perfect. It's just so.
Steffi malt is delicious.
August, look for it. Oktoberfest. We got a new recipe coming out. So, all right. I think we got one more. Oh, actually, two more questions.
Yep.
All right. Every so often, my neighborhood, Chapman Town, right by the brewery, smells like hops, and it's awesome. What's the actual process that is causing that great smell? So we're actually it's actually hops. just to say it. But no, you know, a brewery has a certain smell. I actually it's one of my things of, you know, going there every day, you kind of lose sight of it. But you know, for forever, when I go on vacation, I come back, that smell of just the boiling process. Some of that is malt that you're actually smelling. Some of it is hops as well. It's just the steam that's coming off the kettles that is carrying all those aromatics that are in the raw materials that we're using. So the malt and the hops. I will say, and Ken would probably laugh after I say this, it will not dull your knives. So
now
just saying. No, we had someone years ago that wrote a letter that the steam coming off of our kettles was dulling their knives, and they lived in Chapman Town. So it will not. It's actually when you're not using your knives properly and you're not sharpening them is actually what's
putting them in the dishwasher.
Yeah, right. So just saying, I'm just throwing that out there. This is my opinion too, by the way. I just happen to be on a Sierra Nevada live Facebook feed.
But that steam, I mean, it's just essentially they're boiling the extract that's been pulled off the malt from the mash tun. The hops have been added. That's the kettle boil, and that's when all the aroma comes off. So
isn't it beautiful though? Like when
I love it.
As someone that works at a brewery,
it's bread in the oven.
Yeah, you know, there's just to anyone that's thinking about building a brewery, there's a brewer that I know of that their stack is a little bit more efficient on capturing the heat loss. And what that's done in the brewing process is they're getting less of the smell coming off the stacks. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's just, you know, you want to go up to a brewery and you want to get that smell. And, you know, like Terrence said, sometimes when you go on vacation, you come back. I get it when we start changing brews and just that smell, just,
it's awesome.
It's home.
It's like heaven. Yeah, home.
Yeah.
Oh, you sound like Steve Dressler.
Well, there's a smell in the malt house in your guys' facility too. That's just it's super unique.
Kilning.
And and
cucumber, right? Isn't cucumber a big?
That's the germination.
Germination.
Yeah, it changes. Yeah, throughout the whole process, it's kind of changing.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite malt to smell when you're roasting it? Like, what's your favorite? Like, yeah.
Yeah, there's when we make Munich style malts. Well, all right, I'm going to give you two answers to this.
Okay.
One is just barley, steeped barley coming out of the steep tank has this really like beautiful floral. It's before it gets really green cucumbery smelling. It's just like, it's just. It smells like steeped barley. That's the only way to describe it. So that's really nice. But then. When we make a Munich malt, the whole first part of the kilning cycle is recirculating the humid air, and it's kind of stewing all of the green malt, and it's just this really rich. It actually kind of smells like brewing. It kind of smells like wort, it kind of takes over the whole malt house because our kiln isn't perfectly sealed, and so there's little bits of steam coming out, and I usually go home smelling like it. But it's just a
awesome.
Really rich bakery sort of smell.
Nice. All right. I think we have one more question. Is that right? Yep. Other than beer geeks, what kind of...
Oh, God.
Good.
Okay, we'll start over. Other than beer geeks, what kind of pests are the biggest threat to a malt house? Yes.
Insects. Well, yeah.
Insects, definitely, right. But you got mice and rats, maybe. Yeah,
those are actually easier to take care of. But you would think actually having this big like floor of grain out there, really, whenever we catch, we've got pretty robust pest control. Whenever we catch the pests, they're like out on the perimeter chewing on a couple little pieces of spilled grain. They don't really like the whole sea of it out there.
Right.
But insects are hard to deal with, especially organically in a warehouse that's kind of, open. And so,
they like the barley the most because it has. So the barley might be at 12% moisture, but when we make malt, it's about 3 to 4, maybe 5% moisture, and so insects really can't malt as well. They're not so keen on the malt as they are on the barley, but barley can be a big problem, independent storage. So we don't, we try and just bring in what we're going to use fairly quickly now. We've sorted that out. We've done some trial and error.
So,
nothing compared to beer geeks, though.
So for our listeners,
they make a spray for that.
So for our listeners out there, as far as
Pilsner.
As far as pests, one of the coolest things I remember learning at UC Davis. So I literally paid $100,000 for this. A mouse can fit in anything the size of a dime, and a rat anything the size of a quarter. Just so you know. All right. Okay.
Yeah. We
something to remember.
Yeah.
Right.
Money well spent, Terrence. Money well spent.
Hopefully, everybody learned a little bit of something about malting, about what you guys do. This has been a tremendous live feed. Go to Alameda. Give them the address, Ron.
It's 651A West Tower Avenue. 651A West Tower Avenue, Alameda. But you can just Google the Rake to go to the pub.
Oh, that's what the kids do.
We'll pub for homebrewers out there. We do sell whether it's bags of malt or even down to a pound or whatever. So, we take care of our homebrewers, our whiskey,
awesome.
Our beer fiends. It's a fun place. Food. It's good. It's chilled.
I had no idea. And Ron, I'm glad you gave the address because I almost gave your home address because
it all starts showing up
right here. It was right here.
I know.
They all show up. All the homebrewers show up at your house with a Ziploc baggie. Like, Ron, where's the beer?
Our beer can collection here. These are all made with Admiral malts.
Oh, that's awesome.
The different beers there.
That's really cool.
Kind of fun.
That's cool.
I'm creating my own little mini library of Congress.
The last little bit, Curtis, Ron, everybody out there listening, Sierra Nevada Live, it's back. If you have any suggestions, cheers, everybody. If you got any suggestions of what you want to hear and what you want to learn about, drop them in the feed, and Kevin and Byron and I will try to satisfy everybody. But this has been awesome. Until I can get back down there to Alameda and have a beer with you guys, thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you.
Peace out, everybody.
A lot of fun.
Bye-bye.
A lot of fun. Thanks, guys.